Hi, P-Psych. These are your Module 57 Humanistic Theories notes. Hopefully, just from the name, Humanistic Theories, you can kind of guess or expect what we may be talking about or whose theories that we'll be looking at. There are two people that we've talked about multiple times already before, so here we go. Our central question again is, how do psychologists explain personality? Our learning targets are: I can compare and contrast the humanistic theories of personality with other theories of personality. 2, I can identify frequently used assessment strategies and evaluate relative test quality based on reliability and validity of the instruments. And 3, I can identify key contributors to personality theory. As you may have guessed, we'll be looking at Maslow and Rogers today. So first, what are the humanistic theories as they apply to personality? First, just a reminder, let's throw back a little bit. I'm going to try and get my camera up for you. Hi, y'all. I'm in my bathroom. Again, this is where I record. So if you remember our hand with our for our mnemonics for perspectives, if you remember, humanistic was our ring finger, right? Oh, there we go. So with that ring finger, remember, it's going to be very much based on support and healthy growth, just like hopefully a future partner would be for you. Okay, so it's looking at personality as having a person having the potential for personal growth. Okay, and this theory was really developed in reaction to the focus on drives and conflicts, as we saw in the psychodynamic theory and in the behavioral theories. And where this differs a lot is humanistic theories are going to very much focus on people's self-reported feelings and experiences. So it's rather than having like a projective test or a more formal inventory, like we'll see later on, particularly with the trait theory that we talk about on tomorrow, actually on Wednesday. It's very much going to be what you have to say about yourself here. So it's much less formal. And again, our two main people are Maslow and Rogers. So we're going to start with Maslow, and we're actually going to be starting with some review. So normally, if we were in class, I was going to have you draw this out in your notes. Obviously, can't really do that right now. So I'm going to have you type out the names, really the levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You're going to start from the bottom and work your way to the top level. And I'll give you a hint. At the very bottom, the base, what I'm looking for is for you to write physiological needs. And from there, you're going to work your way all the way up to the top level. So I'll give you a minute to do that. And then we'll check your answers to see if you're correct. Okay, so hopefully this is what you came up with in terms of names. So again, remember we started at the bottom. These are physiological needs, things like food, water, rest, sleep. Okay? Then safety is referring to security. Next, we have belonging, love and belonging, and that's being able to make and maintain relationships, both romantic and friendship. The following level, the fourth level up, is esteem, having those feelings of accomplishment, like getting into the college you want to get into, accomplishing a goal maybe for a club or a sport. Next is self-actualization, achieving your full potential. And then finally, self-transcendence is finding meaning beyond yourself. So hopefully you were able to remember that. So now how does this relate to personality? Maslow's opinions on personality were based on the idea of this hierarchy of needs and a person's drive to become self-actualized and then to seek self-transcendence. So according to Maslow, he said one of the ultimate psychological needs that arises after physical and psychological needs are met and self-esteem is achieved. So that's talking about self-actualization. So we're motivated in terms of the way we think and feel and act to fulfill one's potential. So, how did he develop his ideas of personality? He studied people that he admired, what he saw as healthy, creative people. And he saw that most people that he would consider to be self-actualized had some commonalities. So they were very much self-aware and self-accepting. They knew who they were, a strong sense of who they were, and were okay with who they were. They tended to be more open and spontaneous. They didn't care about other people's opinions for them. They were secure in who they were without seeking approval from others. Their interests were very much problem centered rather than self centered. So, how can I fix this issue that I see in front of me? And they focus their energy on a particular task, often seen as their mission. Like, here's what I was made to do, here's what my life's purpose is. And he found that these people who he considered self actualized had more deep friendships and relationships rather than shallow ones. And they may have had fewer of those deep relationships. And the person was often moved by either a personal experience that kind of pushed them in that direction or a spiritual experience. So, based on that, I'd like you to give two examples of famous people. Think historic figures, any type of celebrity. It could be from back maybe in Maslow's day to now. Who do you think Maslow would consider to be self actualized? And tell me why. What is it that that person has done that makes you think that way? Okay, next is Carl Rogers. And Rogers should be familiar again. We just talked about his style of therapy. And knowing what we know about his therapeutic style tells us a lot about what he thought about personality as well. So, his opinions on personality one, he tended to agree with Maslow. Again, they're both humanists. So, he thought that people are basically good, that they possess self actualizing tendencies, so trying to be the best version of themselves. But he kind of took on more of a person centered perspective. Remember, he called his therapy client centered, so kind of similar idea. And he said that in order for a person to kind of be that best version of themselves, they needed to be in a growth promoting environment that contained three key conditions. And this is a great thing to relate back to our mnemonic, looking at like a ring finger. And these are the three are genuineness, acceptance, and empathy. And what you'll see on the next slide is the analogy that he used was actually an oak tree. Okay. So think about, what does an oak tree need to survive, okay, for it to grow and thrive and flourish? We're going to relate these three ideas to the three key things that an oak tree needs to survive. So here we go. So the first thing that Rogers would say that someone needs, our analogy is the water for the tree, is genuineness. And this is being willing to be open with your own feelings, to drop facades, to not be fake or to put up that wall, to not feel like you have to pretend to be someone or something different than what you actually are. Being very transparent and self disclosing. So being willing to share that with others. The second component is acceptance. And this is like the sun. Okay. And acceptance is related to something we've talked about before of unconditional positive regard. That you have an attitude of total acceptance towards another person, and or someone else shows unconditional positive regard towards you. So an easy example most often would be a parent or a caregiver, a relative, a best friend, where you know that no matter what you do, even if you mess up, even if you make some maybe not so smart decisions, that that person will love and accept you totally and completely. And then the last component here is empathy. And we're going to use the nutrients, think of the soil for our tree. And empathy is the idea of being able to share and mirror our feelings and then reflecting those meanings. So, again, having someone who is empathetic towards us that really tries to put themselves in our place and to understand our emotions at that time, as well as give that to others. Related to this idea, where Rogers put a lot of effort, was this idea of self concept. So, if we were to define a self concept, um, all I would need to do is ask you the question, who are you? And when you answer that question, all of your thoughts and feelings about yourselves really help to develop what your self concept is. And here's what Rogers would say, depending on how you answered that question. Okay? If you had more positive things to say about yourself when answering that question, he would say you have a positive self concept and you tended to act positively and perceive the world more positively. However, if you answered that question, who am I, in a more negative way, then Rogers would say you have a negative self concept, where if you fall short of your ideal self, according to you, you may feel dissatisfied and unhappy with your life. Okay. So, the goal for, according to Rogers, for people like your parents, your teachers, a therapist, is to help their child or their student or their client to know, accept, and be true to themselves. And this is going to lead us to then, what does a personality assessment look like from a humanistic perspective? And just a reminder, because I'm going to ask you about this in just a little bit, of when we talked about psychoanalytic and psychodynamic theories of personality, yesterday we talked about projective tests. If you remember, there's two major projective tests, the TAT or the thematic apperception test, that were those pictures that you wrote the story about, as well as the Rorschach ink blot test. So I want you to think about those versus what I'm going to tell you next. So here, the way personality assessed is a very simple concept, okay, very informal. And it's a questionnaire about self-concept. Okay. So really, there's only two questions here. One, describe yourself as you would ideally like to be. What would that ideal version of yourself, think about that self-actualized version of yourself, look like? And then describe yourself as you are now. And what they would do is compare how you would ideally like to be versus how you actually are. And the more similar to each other, the more positive self concept that someone like Rogers would say you had. And the goal, if we put this in a therapeutic setting, is to move those two, the answers to those two questions, as close together as possible. And again, the way that they did this, the way they answered these questions, was through interviews and conversations. So it wasn't a questionnaire, it wasn't like a BuzzFeed quiz, it wasn't look at this picture and tell me. It was simply a conversation between people or an interview between people. And Rogers would say that led to better understanding of each person's unique experiences rather than taking it down to, some check boxes. So as I mentioned, I was going to have you compare. This is one of our learning targets. So I'd like you to tell me how to compare the assessment techniques of psychoanalytic or psychodynamic approach with what you just learned about the humanistic approach. So go ahead and do that now, please. Okay, so the influence of the humanistic theories. They had a pretty, and continue to have a pretty widespread influence over counseling, over the way education is approached, in child raising, if you read books on parenting, and management. It's very popular in mainstream psychology. If you go to Barnes and Noble, look them up online on Amazon for self-help books, you'll see lots of things about developing a positive self-concept and its connection to success and happiness. However, hopefully by now in the course, you're always asking, great, is this reliable? Is it valid? Okay. So some criticism of humanistic theories. One criticism is that the concepts related to it are both vague and subjective, meaning very much open to opinion. So one example of that is Maslow based his idea of self-actualization on his hierarchy of needs on people he personally admired. Think of Gandhi, I know, as someone that he thought of as self-actualized. So the question is, would the definition of what self-actualization be Would it be different if maybe he admired different people? Maybe he had a little bit different view of the type of person that he thought people should aspire to be. And two, it's not really scientific in nature. There's no way to verify um, someone's level of self actualization because it's so individual. And then two, the second criticism is a criticism of this idea of Rogers. The only question which matters is, am I living in a way which is deeply satisfying to me and which truly expresses me? And the critics say that this is very much individualistic, that it encouraged people to be self indulgent, to be selfish, to erode their moral restraints, because if it's not satisfying to you, then maybe you shouldn't do it. And rather than thinking about how this affects others, it was only focusing on yourself. Where when we do other sorts of assessments on levels of happiness, we know that happier people tend to also focus on others and not just themselves. A last thing that I want you to consider in terms of reliability and validity is when asking that idea of self-concept, how do we know that really measures anything about personality? And two, so what you really should think is it valid? And then two, is it reliable? Would it depend on what happened that day? Would it depend on your mood at that moment? Could that shift how you answer those questions? So the last thing I'm going to have you do, I'm going to trust you since I can't time you. In about a minute, I want you to write down kind of the most important things from this module. What will you take about the humanistic theories of personality? And once you are done with that, we are finished. Until tomorrow, on Wednesday, we'll be talking about trait theory. And then on Thursday, our very last new content of the entire course is social cognitive theories. And then one more assignment on Friday and work on your project. So we are moving right along. Great job. Thank you so much for those of you that are listening to this. You're doing a great job. Keep it up. Have a great day.